I started work at RCA Studios in Toronto in 1965. Swept floors, duplicated tapes and all that for the first year, and then moved into cutting lacquers. Got trained by a couple of Graham Newton, one of the guys that I ran into today. Pete Houston, who just left, he trained me, and another guy, Fred Burchell, who died many years ago. But so I cut lacquers for about 2 years, maybe almost 3 years. Cut lacquers there, and then I got a chance to work in the studio. And how that chance happened, I mean, really big, was strange. It was through a Lou Reed record. Like I say, I cut masters, and they sent in a tape, and they sent in this Lou Reed tape to be mastered, and I put it on, and it sounded dull. It sounded no life to it, no top end. And so I thought maybe the tape was a bad tape copy, because they would usually send a copy of the master. And I phoned the record company. I told them what I had discovered. And they said, "Okay, well, we'll send another tape." So a few days later, another tape arrives. I put it on. It sounds exactly the same. And so I phoned the record company. I said, "This tape sounds exactly the same as the last one. What's going on?" And I guess they were in a hurry to get it out. I said, "Well, listen, just do what you can, and let's get it cut, and so we can get it to the pressing plant." So I did some extensive EQing on it, and got it to a point where I thought it sounded pretty good. I cut it. The record company finally got the test pressing. They said, "Hey, great, we love it." And then I get a call from Lou Reed. And he says, "I don't know what you did, but you made that record sound so much better than the American version. And I'm talking to RCA in the States, and I want them to re-release your version." Well, you can't get a better compliment than that, So we became friends. He came up to Toronto. We did some recording together. I went down to New York, stayed at his place, did some recordings. And so we hung out for a good 6 years, before we kind of drifted apart and got a chance. But that gave me the kick into the recording business. I mean, before that, I had been doing some sessions, jingles and stuff, nothing of note, nobody famous really. But that gave me that hook of credibility. The minute Lou said, "You're my man," I was there. So I just thought that'd be an interesting story to pass on. But yeah, that's where I'm coming from. The Toronto sound. To me, the Toronto sound was really based on the Toronto guitar players. The sound that the Toronto guitar players had was different than anything at that time. I mean, nowadays you hear great guitar sounds, and all of it stemmed from the Toronto guitar sound. Because up until then, rock and roll guitar sounds were clean, regular gauge string guitar solos, which were like piano strings. You couldn't bend them, you couldn't wiggle them, you couldn't whammy them, well, you could whammy them, but you couldn't do much with regular strings. Toronto sound developed using light gauge strings, so you can bend strings, sustain them. It was also the right amount of distortion was really important in the Toronto sound. I mean, there are a million stories around of guys trying to find the secret of the right distortion, and some of the pranks that were played on these poor guys to get that sound. I mean, you've heard of guys taking a razor blade to their speakers, to get that sound. You heard guys doing all kinds of weird things to get that sound. And I know I did a few weird things trying to get that sound, because there was no fuzz tones at that time. So you could only get it by overdriving an amp somehow. And I tried to build my own fuzz tone, which was, it sort of worked, but it was no control on it. It was either like really fuzzy or it didn't work at all. But it got me through for a while till something better came along. But the Toronto sound, basically, I feel was based on the Toronto guitar players and the fact that we liked R&B and blues in this town. We embraced it. I mean, you go to any dance in the city at that time, and you'd hear music that you'd never hear on Toronto radio, ever, because they just didn't play that stuff. And a lot of us used to go to Buffalo to buy our 45s because we couldn't get the stuff in Toronto. I mean, Toronto was all, sort of la-la, Bobby Curtola type of thing. I mean, nothing against Bobby Curtola, but it was like really bubblegummy music on the radio. And and I was part of the Toronto sound. I started off, when I first started playing, hanging around Long and McQuaid's music store when they were on Yonge Street, and practically meeting every guitar player in the city at that point, because that's where you went to buy your guitar strings and guitar picks and instruments and everything. And I saw it develop, and Pete Traynor was a big part of that. He started trying to develop amps that would give us the sound that we were looking for. And I personally road tested half a dozen of Peter's amps. I'd come into the store and he'd see me. He said, "I got this new design that I got. I want you to." He said, "You playing this weekend?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, take this amp and check it out. And tell me what you think." And I would do that and help develop that whole Traynor amplifier thing. And there was like a real musical community at that point. It was a great time to be a musician and in a band, I'll tell you that. And the Toronto sound, like I say, is the two things: the guitar playing and the fact that we all love blues and R&B, and that's what everybody got into. And that sound traveled around the world. I ran into people. I used to play a few places in Buffalo and the States, or places like Owen Sound, where a lot of Americans would come up for summer holidays and all that. And guys would come up to me and say, "Wow, where'd you learn how to play like that?" I said, "You think I'm good? Check out some of these guys in Toronto, like Robbie Robertson, Dominic Triano, Fred Keel." I mean, there's some great guitar players. And it all stemmed from that Robbie Robertson type sound, which was based on Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters. Howlin' Wolf really, he had a lot to do with that sound, because he had the bends and the light gauge strings, and it developed and it spread. I saw it spread. I saw it spread over to England. I saw guitar players. The first time I went to England, guitar players all sounded like Chet Atkins, playing really straight, clean. Next time I went over there, it was like, hey, it's almost like I'm back in Toronto again, And I'm sure, even if you ask Eric Clapton, I'm sure he would even mention that somebody, somehow, he got a whisk of the Toronto sound. And I think that's what it is, myself. And, at that time, I had a Fender Bassman amp, which was actually a bass amp, but it had two 12-inch speakers and a 60-watt head. And my first guitar was a Les Paul Jr. And that combination didn't quite work for me. Then I switched to a Stratocaster, and that was a little closer. And then when I saw Robbie Robertson and he was playing a Telecaster, I swapped to a Telecaster, and that's when it all started coming together. The one I had was a single cutaway. It wasn't a double cutaway. So it was like Les Paul Jr., I guess. It was the cheapest Gibson guitar they had in the store. And I think I remember paying something like $149, which was a lot of money at that time. But when I think of it now, the problem with that particular guitar was that the neck was too heavy for the body. So what would happen if you happened to take your hand off the neck? The guitar would just hit the floor. So once I realized that, I got rid of it and got a Stratocaster, which was a great guitar. It was actually, in many ways, better than the Telecaster, but to be part of the sound, you had to be part of the image. So I traded in a perfectly good Stratocaster guitar for a cheaper Telecaster, because they were cheaper at the time. But I loved it. You know, that was the way to go, and made me feel better. Made me feel like I played better, and I fit into the picture. You know, so we had a #1 record locally, basically, mostly in Ontario. A few places. I mean, I know it charted in Vancouver and a few places out west. I don't know if it got to #1 out there, but it did fairly well across the country for a short period of time. But it did hit #1 on Chum, that was sort of our golden grail there, because we were trying to bust down Chum's door for years, trying to get them to play our stuff, and they'd never play it, and they'd always chase us away. And finally, they somehow decided to play our record, and we got on Chum. Well, they played it because at that time their competition was CKFH, and CKFH started playing it, and it went up the charts. And it was up to like number 12 on CKFH when Chum first put it on as number 30 on their chart. And I think it was like in 3 weeks, it went from 30 to like 10 to 2 to 1 on Chum. It almost made it faster up the charts on Chum than it did on CKFH. But that was our claim to fame. You know, it was, we had broken the golden barriers to Chum radio, you know. And so that was great. I mean, we did well. You know, our booking gigs increased, you know. So the band was called Richie Night and the Midnights, and the name of the song was Oh Charlena. And they still play it today. As a matter of fact, last night I bumped into one of the DJs from AM 740, and he was telling me, "Yeah, I still play it on the show." And I said, "Glad to hear it." 1963. Yeah, I was like 17, I think, at the time. But it was big time for us, you know. I mean, it was like, even though it was like a local hit, but we've since last year, 2 years ago, we had our first reunion, like basically a barbecue of all the guys in the band. And then last year, we had the same thing, but we decided, Doug Chappelle, who's the bass player, and I decided to put together a history of the band. So we got all the pictures and everything we could scrape together, recordings and everything, put together a whole DVD, CD package of, like, you know, just so everybody could have an entire history of the band right there. And Doug did a lot of research on the internet, and he found some interesting stuff. Did you know that a band in Wisconsin took almost our name, they call themselves the Midnighters, and recorded a version of Oh Charlena that was like a local hit in Wisconsin? And there's like 9 other bands that did covers, not necessarily from our version, because our version was a cover as well. It was a cover of an American band. But to have another band cover our cover was, well, it was funny to hear about it. And have a local hit with it too. So it's a strange tune, you know.